Hello, HeroinChurch. Just real quick in the beginning, yeah, I don't approve of the Gray Texas tone toward you, and I don't approve of yours toward him, and it doesn't matter. I don't expect to approve of them. If you want me to compare them, frankly, I think he is trying to be more insightful of you using his value system than you are of him using your value system, and I'll get into that. But again, that doesn't justify, because it isn't, it's words, sticks and stones. I don't think that it ranks to defending somebody, whoever or whichever I might defend, if I were that sort, inclined toward that sort of thing, would have the right to be offended by me doing that. That would involve me speaking for them and all other sorts of mess-making interference. We're here to debate. I assume that two people can debate with each other. And we'll get into some of the more substance of it. But in all seriousness, I do think you're worth talking to. I don't agree with Gray Text that you're not worth talking to and then talking to anyway or about. And I'll get into that. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, sort of a long clip. I don't really remember why I left it so long, but I don't want to take things out of context, and so this is most of the video, actually.
I just want to talk about individualism for a minute. I know that Pyro's main thing lately, or all the time I guess, is this individualism thing. Pro-choice, yada yada yada. Generally I consider myself to be heavily pro-choice. I have been in arguments with people, of course, about the euthanasia thing, about abortion.
Okay, so naturally, as far as I can tell, all the anti-natalists are pro-choice in that sense. But if it's going to be only when the choice is to cease life, that's, you know what I mean, that's not the full choice. The pro-lifers, of course, have similar arguments to why they can control the eggs and the embryos, because they're going to be whole people. People often misunderstand this kind of thing. I mean, often when someone tells you something and you're like, well, I am that, and you're saying you're not that, the only reason rhetorically to say that is in case you have that value and you think it's right to be the way they're saying. If I'm pointing out that my position is a pro-choice one, yeah, I think that's compelling to you if you can see how the logic. I'm not just saying because it's a compelling thing. I mean, that's like the whole insults, where you have you fuck dogs kind of insults. Obviously that is just because it's a negative thing. There's no relationship in it, and people honestly thinking, oh yeah, there is, because they just, when you start to believe in evil, all evil is connected. But that's insanity. So I'm not accusing you of that, actually. Well, and let me say that too, because I'm sure I'll mention some things that come from this whole grouping of you guys. But I mean, I don't think you are reacting like you're part of a group. I think you're reacting like an individual. I'm hearing your thoughts on all of this, and when you defend Gary or Long Cat is Long, I mean, I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that you're doing that from your own perspective and as an individual. Not everybody in this group, which is just, it's just the name for a group of people that have an affiliation that are, it's not, anything more than that. I mean, there's a group of names Gary has in his thing, so, that group, some might say, hey, I'm not in that group, and whatever, the edges can be blurry. But there is some sort of a, relationship, a group relationship. And you seem to me to be speaking for yourself.
Your personal decision about your own life, largely your own body.
The crux of this argument, really to understand, okay, this is not me just making up a hand-waving thing. The ovum is a part, and now don't try to knock me for being a nitpicker or just, that's just a word game. No, you guys are saying you have absolutely objective logic. That means absolutely every detail can matter, potentially. And this one matters, right? The ovum is undeniably a part of the mother's body. It is not an individual. The idea that, but it could be an individual. Well, actually, no. There's millions of these things, or at least hundreds of thousands, I forget. And the chances of them becoming an individual human are very, very small, right? It does not have a good chance of surviving. To say that each one of those ovum should be considered as a person, no pro-choice person would say that. And it just happens to go both ways. So when the mother is deciding whether or not to procreate, as if it's that simple, but okay, the logical absolute fact for all of the absolutists has to be that by the details, the mother is making a decision about her own body. And the fact that later on it can make its own decisions, even if that later is a month or 3 months. I don't know whether you'd want to use full consciousness or just sort of animal rights kind of, it can live on its own kind of thing. Even if you use some crazy thing while it's not, hasn't been born yet, or we want to say as soon as it is born, even though it's a baby and it can't do anything for itself, that it somehow has an autonomy. I'm all for that. If we choose that moment to say, okay, it has some right, you can't, you have to try to care for it because you brought it into this world. It's risky. You have to mitigate the risk. But that doesn't change the fact that the woman is making the decision about the part of her body. And that makes it a personal decision. And it's a lot like you can have a lot of visceral and important feelings for things that you care about that you just can't decide for other people. And really, I'm sure there's lots of fun examples people can think of, but I usually just think of medical examples. Do you want heart surgery? Do you want brain surgery that grosses people out, right? Then I go, no, I don't want it, no. So those are personal. And if somebody decides they're not for themselves, it just doesn't lend itself to a proof that nobody should be in any situation ever that makes them want to take the opposite course. Just say that.
You can bring the kid into the world, anyone can have a kid, and they can just mistreat that fucking kid for many years until that kid maybe is strong enough to move out on their own. And that's the real world.
Yes. I think that all parents screw up their kids. That's my theory. All parents screw up their kids. That's my theory of how parenting is. So what can you do about that? I mean, I think that you could try not to screw up your kids. Of course, you should help as much as possible. You have to be understanding when they're screwed up and go, okay, somehow my responsibility. Even if it was genetic and born that way, whatever, you brought them into the world. I believe, my version of how I satisfy the antinatalist suckiness of the world, is very much with the big part of you have to stand by your kids forever. It's not even when they're out of the home. Now, when they're out of the home, they have to do certain economic things for themselves, potentially. But you always have to be some kind of support, and I won't always have to clarify. There could be tough love. If your child becomes a criminal, it doesn't mean you hide them out in some sort of, narrow interpretation of best interest. But, that you might have to turn them in or something. But in most cases, if they fail and have big serious problems or shock you, you have to stand by them. So there's no abandoning them at all. And if they do something material against you, you might have to protect yourself. If they're violent against you, you can't just let them hurt you. Or if they steal from you, you might have to lock them out of your house. But I still would say that you would have to maintain an interest. I mean, that you created and brought this experience is a lifelong thing. So that's the solution that I believe in for that is a major ethic. And instead of saying that we all have to die, we should try just being responsible for actions in that way for a few hundred years, and see if we don't have happier kids even when they do have problems. So I don't have that sort of parent, and oddly, people that do don't seem to know how important it is. So what, you have to not have that kind of a situation in order to think it's important. Oh, the other thing you do for the kids, this is a practical thing, that's my theory, I don't know how it'll work out, is you can't really, since we're all screwed up from our parents and then you're going to screw up your kids, you can't just say, oh, I won't screw up my kids. You can do as much as you can for them, but you got to assume when you're screwed up, you won't know when you're screwing them up. So you just got to be honest with your kids. Don't try to deify yourself. So they'll be prepared as soon as they're intellectually mature enough, which in my case was like, I think it started about 8, maybe earlier, to realize that the adult, that you are flawed. And hopefully figure out the flaws that you couldn't warn them about. You might say, hey, I have this flaw, I'm lazy about this. But all the flaws you don't know about, got to give them the tools to see those, the freedom to think about them, and staged by age and maturity, so that when they're on their own, they'll have tools to solve their own problems, also facing their own problems. And just bring consciousness into this. And I think, even though I know you can never be perfect, I know also, or believe, that with consciousness of something, you can mold it like into something else. You can process it and turn one kind of material into another, and construct things. Yeah.
And then you're just talking about this individualism shit like it's some kind of mark of honor.
Yes. My form of individualism, I believe, not the one I live, this is not what I'm talking about, philosophically, my definition, my way of thinking about it, hopefully the way I live, is a mark of honor, yeah. It's not the kind of individualism, it's just an opportunistic thing. Somebody wants to call it individual because they don't give a shit about other people. I think we have evolved together. I don't think philosophies drive people to want to do bad to other people or want to do good. I don't think it's the cause of the philosophies. I believe the philosophies are a symptom. People that want to do bad come up with a philosophy, and people that want to do good come up with a philosophy. And if somebody has a good intention and makes a philosophy, somebody with a bad intention will use it, and vice versa. So there's a way past that. I think I know a way past that problem. It has to do with skepticism and dogmatism. Because any philosophy can be taken skeptically or dogmatically, and it's the dogmatism that is always the problem, no matter what other kind of philosophy it is, individualistic or whatever, or allegedly individualistic, because obviously dogmatism can't be truly individualistic. So an enlightened individualism where, of course I'm related to everybody and my cousins and all of us, and my shoes were made by hundreds of people spread across the world. I think I'm well able to say it's in my individual interest to embrace that, yes, I want to do good for people, and I want to invent philosophies that are expressions of that. I want to do good for people, and I want to invent philosophies that are expressions of that. I want to do good for people and I want to invent philosophies that are expressions of that.
And you spent an hour berating Longcat because he is a robot, and anyone other than Gary who...
You said it. No, okay. Well, okay, I'll let you finish.
Talks about antinatalism is shit because they have similar beliefs and have come to similar conclusions, and you think that they're all copying Gary? No.
It's better if you don't pause these while you're playing them and just make a shorter notes, even if they're right next to each other, I've found. No, I don't react to you the same way I reacted to Longcat, and I don't pigeonhole Longcat as a certain person. Like even things like, you're stupid. Well, I was feeling that, and he acted and said some stupid things. But on the other hand, it was reactionary. It's localized in time. It's non-statistical. He was pissed, I was pissed, so part of the rhetoric is not taken literally. On the other hand, yes, I think some of the things he said showed a lack of comprehension, due to his anger. I'm willing to forgive by that. Or even if there's no forgiveness, for either one of us, and we both stepped over the line, doesn't really matter. I mean, you had a battle, doesn't mean you can't go to the diplomatic table, or not that it's a negotiation, but to be more diplomatic, or just in this case civil, and find a point. And if he doesn't, fine. And if he doesn't, the first things you said to me were really insulting, and I thought, ooh, how volatile is this person? Can I talk to them about the subject, or are they going to be too hurt? And then you said some things about how terrible it was, and I'm like, ooh. And then I talked to you a little bit more, and I go, actually, can't handle, and is having his own opinion, bringing up good points. I thought from the start, after that very first thing, and first impressions don't mean much to me. You brought up issues I thought were good. They're within the scope of the antinatalism we've been talking about, but they also fill in some areas, and with some examples, and bringing in, letting it be personal, which again, to refer always back to Gary on this, I guess I can give him some credit for this particular expression of it, that Gary also does that, lets in some personal reality to it. I happen to, that's a simile between you two. That's also why I can okay, so you also like to say a lot of insults. One thing I've noticed is some people almost do the super harsh insult because you can't take it literally. If I say you're a child molester, it's obviously when you're not, then people know it's like, that's how angry. I'm as angry at you for what you are as I would be at a child molester, or something along that, line of thinking. Whereas if you go, you're immature, like Graytex, then that hits close to home. So I think there could be a kind of mercy in that, and that's one reason that insult is, those wild insults are not hard for me to take if somebody's giving some sort of contribution to the ideas, even accidentally, even if they don't know they're giving them, even if it's just psychologically. But in your case, I don't think that's the case. I think you're thinking about this. I totally disagree with your take on it right now, but I see you processing things and coming up with new ways to express, and you acknowledge, nobody else is saying this, but you acknowledge certain aspects without retreating from the essence of what you're saying. And yet these kinds of accommodations are how we shape a new thing. And what I find interesting about the conversations is it can happen, it goes on for a long time, who knows what happens in the end, but that both parties are shifting and reshaping, but they never become the same shape. And sometimes they form a whole, and it's like, well, these two ideas are part of a whole. But more often, and unlike I think in the case of ours, they're just different shapes that happen to be, in this case, in the natalism, comments on natalism and life issues. and maybe individual rights. So the shapes become more well defined because of this process, and I see you taking part in that process. What really pisses me off is when somebody is not taking part in that process. It's just wasting my time. You know what I mean? If somebody's bitching and whining and calling me names, they're not necessarily wasting my time if there's something else there, or they express something, or maybe they express something personal, and you just kind of, there is a Tourettic part of that ritual for some people if they're going to be personal versus like primal scream. Let me tell you something personal that's really important. Primal scream, fuck you. That's great. I don't care if that's the bookends for it. And I'm not saying you're doing that. Well, yeah, you have. You said some pretty deep shit to us right on the subject. And though there's the whiny like tone of voice, I don't really think of you as whiny at all. Even though you are a little, more than a little, but to me, there's an interpretation of it, because I think that you didn't go through every single thing that bugs you in life, and every little thing. You kind of said all of that stuff is shit, but when you focus down to, hey, things in life can cause attitudes to real face it. I thought you went to some good things that were like, yeah, I hope those are real things. That is good people to face that, and for you to mention to other people to face that when it's not something they're going through directly themselves in that form. I think everybody goes through, like, the not finding love. It's like, no matter what your sexuality, for some reason you can't find love. So anyway, so I berated Long Cat, not because I think he won't, and through the I don't know, I berated him because I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I originally had not responded to that video, and then he asked me, and I just got this notion, oh, I guess he made a point I missed. I don't remember that video, and I went and watched it. It's like, there's no point in here. He's just angry and he's copying. So it's a challenge. I don't give somebody an hour of my time, well, longer, because I watched his for a half an hour and I'd taken the notes and pausing a little bit. That was probably 45 minutes or something. So for no reason. I mean, if he just keeps making the same kind of videos, I might reply just long enough for it to be if it's entertaining a couple times for myself to express, okay, now here's what I think about people that won't actually move the conversation. But I already had a PM with him, and he made that reply video. And the reply video in the PM, he said, well, it was a little bit angry still, but no. Well, yeah, it was, but I mean, no, it was that's. I mean, I don't want to discourage people from becoming even more civil, but there's also probably a limit to how civil is appropriate when you're disagreeing on things that you take of fundamental import. You just shouldn't get too crazy, but it's not so much the crazy part that's important to me. If it's a long period of time, like sometimes Gary has gotten so mad at me for, and actually recently, and it's slowed down me watching, and I'm sort of slowly watching him again, but I haven't, just seen a couple of videos of his, is that if it's going to take up a lot of clock time, then there is a point at which, like, come on, wasting my time. But I'm waiting to respond to a second part video of Long Cat is Long that he said he was going to make. But the first response, there's some reaction to mine, which again, given the kind of video, was totally appropriate. But he put in also some stuff, his stuff, his take on this, how it really works for him. You didn't have to avoid the phantasmagorical or terms that have been coined by the school of philosophy. I'm into schools of philosophy, to tell you the truth. Another word for a cult. And he got, I think, some of his own opinion there, enough, And I'm not saying that I would automatically respond. It just doesn't matter. It's just that criteria. But I mean, in this case, I would respond because we're in the middle of a conversation. I would probably respond, especially if, with their rival of points. It's at least to follow it through to the end. Even if something like that becomes a mediocre plot, you kind of watch the movie to the end sometimes. And I think it's going to be better than that. I mean, we had a PM. It was very interesting, and I sort of appreciate people that can share their emotions, even to the putting the foot in the mouth and oops, I got a little crazy, but I don't think so type thing. I mean, I don't want to imply anybody thinks that, but you can go, I got a little bit crazy, and that doesn't mean I don't have a point, but and it's it's analogous to making up with people in real life, but it really isn't, because this is an intellectual exercise, and it's a lot easier, and we don't hurt each other materially, or say let's be roommates and then we hate each other and move out and then we're in a financial crisis. So none of that's happening. It's all intellectual. So it's sort of a free card to be blunt, be honest, and recover from that. So that's why I berated Long Cat, but that is not really a beratement in a sense, in the big picture. The individual one was a beratement. I wanted to give a negative feedback to that kind of video. And the irony was just too thick, because it was I know I'm not going to say gotcha, it means you're brainless. No. But, it's like one of those things that makes it look like, but I wasn't really fine. That's the joke. That's the satire thing. You're not really copycat, but then again, let's remember, boys and girls, Barklord, when he started this, did not say you guys were a cult. He said, here's a list of things. Look, some of them apply to you. You could have just as easily gone, yeah, well, some of them apply to everybody, but they don't. No, there was some aptness to ones he pointed out. And sorry, but you point out embarrassing things about us and go, well, it's objective and there's truth. Look at the links. Well, Barklord's saying the same thing, and I happen to agree that there was some links. Not that you are a cult, but that there is some links in the cliquishness. And any group can have those links, and it's fair to point that out with any group and be a watchdog. Any groups need watchdogs. Okay? And even if you think, well, your guys' insults of us were objective, that doesn't matter, because objective proofs aren't instantaneous. So the accusation can be put on the table with the benefit of the doubt that the person really is trying to prove it objectively, and say, look, here's my objective proof. You can't say that you don't have a chance to give the objective proof. You can't say, well, if it was objective, I would have already figured it out and believed it myself. That's not objectivity. So there's a give and take. So yeah, so I think Long Cat and I, not that we won't argue or decide, no, I really don't want to talk to him anymore, but I don't think that's where we are now. But it definitely wasn't against anybody that supports Gary, right? I treat you all very differently. I think you have to admit that.
Overvaluing individualism, and the only reason I can think that you would be doing that is because of your ego. Individualism is ego. It's ego. And if you haven't outgrown your ego yet, I'm sorry, but that's just sad. Because it just shows how limited you are as a human being. Your ego is going to be nothing in the end. It's just going to be dirt, buried in the ground. Shit all. No one's going to remember it. No one's going to give a flying fuck what happened in your life or how individual you were. So
sounds very private and relaxing, that. Well, I don't think it matters at all if anybody cares. We're a part of history. I'm a part of nature. Like I said in the comments, I am, the environment where I am. We always want to think we're in the environment. My sense of self is that if you keep closing in down, this is my environment, and then I am the environment. Inside this part, I'm the environment. And it's true. If there's a bacteria or some parasite, I'm the environment in here. For the cells, for the organs. That connects you diffusely, but you are still centered. So the ego, I have a video on the ego, and really I advise looking at it diffusely. And that goes into nature. But you can't get rid of this location. You can't grow beyond your ego. When Graytex mentioned maturity, and I understand how that can be condescending, but I got it when I was young, we all get it. And you got to remember, the reason he knows it's true is because he was young too. But it doesn't mean you haven't figured out things that he still hasn't figured out, or vice versa. None of that is set in stone. But this is the kind of thing that I think is missing, because personally I see a lot of your ideas going together, and then sometimes I see this actually was a new one, but this kind of thing where I see that as you just have to think it through. Being free of ego. I know what you're going for there. It's like the objectivity thing and the don't be so selfish thing. It's just an irony, it's like the way you take a bias out is by admitting what it was. You know what I mean? You can take a pattern out if you know what it is. If you're photoshopping something and you're trying to take it out, you don't not look at what's there. You have to look really closely at what's there, and then you can adjust for it, and you can take out almost an arbitrary shape. Right? So you have to know what your biases are to take them out. It works in a practical sense. It's more like, I know that I'm lazy about doing the dishes. And then you think that right at the point where you're about to yell that you're always doing the dishes, nobody else in the household ever does them. And you try to think when was the last, and then you realize, oh, it is your turn. You have to start by knowing what your biases are to have a chance to double guess them. You have to know it ahead of time, because we are dominoes when the time is happening. 90% of what's going on. I agree. But that's the point of facing your biases, is that you can set those dominoes up so you have some switches and things that can take you in the direction you want to go. And then you assimilate something that can be like being free of the ego. Because you make a giving choice where all the material evidence is that the material benefit is to the other person rather than yourself. Seems like being free of ego, but it isn't. It comes back to your sense of self. And for example, I am the environment around me. I'm going to help the people around me. It's helping myself. Okay.
And I know that you're going to say, oh, well, you were so rude to Grey Tex, blah, 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 blah. Well, Grey Tex is another jackass who doesn't support pro-choice. He doesn't support freedom. And he's not an individual. He's a clone. He is the fucking clone culty thing. He's like Mr. Joe Average, robot number 3.0506. Believes that life is great and anyone who dissents is a piece of shit.
Well, I just assume you're not very familiar with Grey Tex or his politics. He's very critical, even cynical, particularly cynical about the world in many respects. It's one of the values of the anti-natalists, is that for those of us very cynical about the human race, how it's behaving, how it's behaved in the past, where it's going, what things might be going on, people that are socialist or liberal or progressive, or just conscientious people of any alleged ideology, they could see, Jesus, things are bad for a lot of people, a lot more people than it should be, than it seems like it should be. Grey Tex is one of those people. I mean, he has a liberal sensibility, and you misread him. He has flaws, of course, but that's what I'm saying. It's not the apt insult for him. That's not true. And similarly with Das Spook, he does not have a mean sense of humor. The idea of that is insane. He has the most compassionate sense of humor, and how people might find it biting, I guess. I wouldn't. If those things were directed at me, I would be honored. I would. That's just a simple fact. And it's not because it's such a work hard and I did it. No, it's like I can see the thought and compassion, like that thing he did for Anton. That much time, and I watched it, and I watched the whole thing, and every single minute, there was not one minute in there that was just like, I'm gonna make a South Park joke and and it'll be fun, and people will laugh, and Anton's name's there, so it's kind of like it's about Anton. No, every fucking sentence was about things that Anton has said, that Das Spook has said, that we have all discussed. And not only that, but there was Anton's views in there too, within the satire, but not always just making them look silly, but actually putting a kernel of it in a way that you could recognize as like, yeah, that's the way he puts it. But then, yeah, turning that into something absurd, but in relation to another thing. And like satire, there's plenty of moments in there you might say, well, what about these 5 words? But there's no doubt in my mind that that was a very thoughtful body, and to think that much about someone else's position is compassionate. And I personally think the sense of humor is funny too, and the more biting the better. But then again, my grandmother was from Maine, so she had a biting sense of humor. You ask her what time it was, and she'd say, "It's time for all fools to die. Do you feel sick?" And she thought that was so funny. Oh, I miss her.
Don't seem to mind you as an individual, but then again, as I stated, individuality is not the point, so it doesn't really matter what I think about you, right? Yeah.
See, that sentence was a work of art. And I see in there somebody was accusing you of being a Poe. You're not a Poe, but then again, you're not, I could be projecting this or something into it, but you're not as, as loose is not the word with words, but even though part of it's just subconscious or not unconscious, but just the way the words come, but your timing and the words that you wait for, sometimes okay, most people won't get why I'm saying this.
Don't seem to mind you as an individual, but then again, as I stated, individuality is not the point, so it doesn't really matter what I think about you, right? Yeah.
I don't mind you as an individual either, let's just put it that way. Does it matter? No, not really. Alright. Yeah, no, in all reality, like this has an interesting thing, but there is a lockdown meaning to that. No, it doesn't. This is about the arguments, and ultimately the individuality and stuff is where the drama and a lot of the noise comes from. So we got to handle it separate from that. It's just that the reality is that we're all built out of bodies, and we even think with our bodies, and so we're going to be individual whether we like it or not. So we have to start with an acknowledgement of our individuality, and then we can say, oh, you're the kind of individual that is this way, so I'll understand you that way. But I'm the kind of individual that's this way, so you understand me that way. And in that process, we might find that some things are unbalanced, and they can't be negotiated the way they have been, or they need to be renegotiated or something. So yeah, I think you do. It's true. I want to write the record of what's going on, or like this site when we have the structured conversation at my site the way I want it. It'll be, it kind of keeps a trace where it doesn't have the individuals in it too much. People could dig into that, but really would have a trace of what the opinions were and the bullet points of the ideas and the counterpoints and all the things those people had said, right? But the only way to generate that is if the people actually doing it start by understanding what kind of individuals they're dealing with. It's sort of both sides of the answer, but not really. I'm saying you have to start with the individuality. There's no escaping it. And that's also the fun part. So, all right, cheers.